I looked through this through this book to find therapists, and I was looking for someone who specialized in eating disorders because I was finally at this point of like, I really need help, because it, for the first time, I felt completely unmanageable around it and really upset around it, and also was not happy with my body. Was totally into the, like, I felt fat, having fat days, that kind of, I think it also is weird to talk about because I've changed my perspective so much. Because I don't talk about, oh, I feel fat now. So it's strange to remember that it was not that long ago that that's how I talked about myself. Yeah, and then I found Anne's number just completely randomly and called her and got into group therapy, because I could afford that. And that kind of was the starting point of changing everything pretty much.
Do you think it's beneficial or not beneficial to think of, and then explain your answer, to think of food as a drug and binges as like a relapse, or not even binges, but just like eating one candy bar?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Um, I I think it's more detrimental, as far as the relapse, talking about it as a relapse, because I think that it just induces more shame and guilt. And I've also learned that there's meaning to it. So it's not just like I relapse because I just have no control because I'm this crazy addict. It's there's something external going on or internal going on that I don't have any other coping mechanism, and I'm turning to food. And I think calling it a relapse just kind of dismisses the how it, I mean, it's so much more than that. And I think talking about food as a drug, I can relate to that. I can understand, because I do, and still today, I feel like I crave it, or I like really need it. And I've gotten like emotional around wanting chocolate. And I've like broken into piggy banks for for chocolate. So it makes sense to me to compare it to drug addiction. But at the same time, it's so much more complex, I think, than drug addiction. And I think it's because food is not drug. I mean, we need food, and food has an entire different relationship in society than drugs do. So I think it depends. I think it's not something that should just be taken lightly. Like, and I feel like I could say it more as a joke, but I know that I've actually compared my chocolate intake to alcohol once to my girlfriend. That like I was like, you're offering me like a beer, and I want something more like Everclear, like, and that really alarmed her that I had that strong of a relationship to food. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I have an eating disorder and she doesn't, or I grew up. I don't know. I feel unresolved about the drug, like calling it a drug or relating it to that.
Two things. First of all, what was she? If you could just give a little bit more context to what was the chocolate that was like the beer versus the chocolate that would have been like the Everclear.
I don't remember for that example, but I do know in general, if it's like, oh, do you want a bite of my chocolate, or do you want to share this like tiny brownie? and I want my own like pint of ice cream, or like an entire box of Oreos. Yeah. or 2 candy bars. And I do currently still eat chocolate like that, and I do so with a lot less shame. And I'm still a little private about it because it's still really scary to own that, because people have a lot of judgments around that. But I'm trying to find acceptance with that because I just really like eating a lot of Oreos sometimes. Yeah, or sometimes I know that I've still eaten emotionally, and sometimes food feels really good, and I'll deal with my feelings later. So yeah, I guess I just have an awareness now, which makes me feel better about it. And also I've just lived with so much shame around my body and around eating, and I've finally realized that it's no one's business, like, so I think sometimes I have that sort of feistiness about how I eat, because I'm kind of pissed for living a certain way for so long and letting people make my body and my food their issue.
The other thing I was gonna say, I need just like a quick transition sentence. You're talking about how you view, how sometimes people view food as a drug, and then you talk about that. But I just need like basically like a topic sentence, something like, a lot of people compare food to drug use and binging to relapses, but I think it's complicated, or something along those lines.
Okay. Well, I guess, yeah, being in, trying OA, Overeaters Anonymous, it felt like chocolate and sweets were being put in the same plane, or on the same plane as drugs and alcohol. And as a sober person, like, I understand what relapse is and all that stuff. And so in OA, that felt like the relapse if I were to eat chocolate or eat outside of my food measurements, that would be my relapse. And it felt full of shame, and it didn't feel it. Food to me is so much more complex than that of drugs and alcohol, because I don't need drugs and alcohol to live my everyday life. And also eating food doesn't ruin my life the same way that doing drugs and drinking alcohol does.
That's great.
Okay. Did this? Okay.
The next topic I'd like to talk about is body image. It's hard to even describe, I'm sure, because it's like when you get it in your head that you're unhappy with your body, it's kind of just like it perpetuates. I mean, it sort of it informs the way that you look at the world. Like, you don't even realize like how you're looking at it. It's just like that's just how the world is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you talk about sort of like the idea of body image and how you've had body image issues, and what some of the average thoughts you would have going through your head were?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think from the time that I was called fat in 3rd or 4th grade, it was my body, the way that I look, not thinking about it, was unacceptable. And being taller than most other girls, and also just a larger person, I think I'm not petite. I never have been. And being around petite people, I felt like I had to work extra hard to be as petite as my body possibly could. And I felt like that was reinforced, um, because I was never popular. Like, I was never the pretty girl. I didn't get attention from boys. And so it felt like, oh, of course, it's because I'm fat and ugly. um, and then, um, and I think, I guess just through middle school, and early high school, um, just being skinny, like flat stomach. And I've asked my mom her definition of what being healthy or fit means to her. And she was like, well, your stomach is supposed to be flat. Because I felt like I played sports in middle school, and like I went to the gym like when I was older. And so it was kind of like, I kind of felt that I was always being pressured to fit in this, like, for people to see me as healthy. But I didn't fit that idea, that standard of what it means. I think I realized that it's not being healthy, that there's actually a look. Yeah, I made that connection somewhere, that it doesn't matter if you are or not, that there's actually a look that people are expecting. Also, I never felt like I was conventionally pretty. And I went to my high school, there was a lot of like preppy girls, lots of blonde hair, and I've always been a little bit different. And at that time in high school, I was very different from the popular crowds. And so that was another thing, that like, if nothing else, I can be skinny too. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it just kind of was always about being as skinny as possible, like flat stomach. And I mean, there's like, I've hated having cellulite, and I've cried over that. And like have had cellulite like on my calves, and like I'm not supposed to have cellulite there. And like having, like, I know that there was a time while I was in therapy with Anne, and that I was crying because I felt like my boobs were too big. And then like my arm flab. And then nowadays I work in retail, and so I'm in fitting rooms, and I hear women talk about their bodies all the time. And it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to have this, or I'm not supposed to have that. And those are all the ideas that I grew up with too. You're supposed to be tight, no cellulite, no love handles. My body is supposed to be smoothly curved, and which I've always had, like, my hips have never been like smooth. Like, I have like my thighs, and then I have my stomach with love handles. And that's always driven me crazy. And I've always had like a pooch on my stomach. And for as long as I can remember, there's probably a time that I didn't have that, but in my head, I did. So, yeah.